Good evening, viewers. Welcome to your number one health show, HealthZone on Baina TV. Assalamu alaikum. This evening, I have with me in the house Dr. Yakub Yusuf, Medical Director, Kojak Medical Center in Accra, and he is here to talk to us about sickle cell disease. Welcome, Doc.
Thank you very much.
Okay. So tell us, what is sickle cell disease?
Okay, sickle cell disease is a group of diseases which kind of like comes about as a result of what I call it a malfunction in the production of our red blood cells. The disease in itself starts from the genes, where the production of your red blood cell doesn't follow the normal pathway. And in this specific instance, what happens is that one inherits from their parents a codon of a red blood cell which doesn't follow the normal pathway. Let me break it down to very understandable levels. We have certain codes, certain instructions that our gene gives to our body to produce red blood cells. A normal red blood cell is circular, looks like a donut. You see how a donut looks, that's how it looks, and then there's a dipping in the middle. There's a reason why it's like that. It gives the red blood cell a very reasonable degree of flexibility to flow through vessels and capillaries. But in the case of people with sickle cell disease, that is not the case. The red blood cell, because of this anomalies in formation, looks like a sickle instead of the circular donut-like shape. Hence the name sickle cell. So I'm sure as we move on in the discussion, I would explain further what this anomaly looks like.
Okay, so at what age is this disease normally detected?
Okay, with the advancement in medicine, you can detect sickle cell disease at very early ages, even when the child is in the womb. But then in this part of our world, our medical practices are not that advanced. But then as early as in the stomach, there are tests that can check for genetic disorders and some other diseases. But then in this part of our world, when women go for antenatal, there's usually screening, there's usually questioning as to her sickling status, that of her parent, because there are parents and people who take this very seriously. That is one way of finding out the possibility of what your child might have. And then other screening, mostly after childbirth, most babies would look very fine, and there's a reason why that is. That even if they have the sickle cell, they are carrying the sickle cell, they still look fine. But then after 4, 5, 6 months, they might start showing symptoms or sign of sickle cell disease. Now the reason why that is because for the very first couple of weeks or months of childbirth, there's something called fetal hemoglobin. That hemoglobin looks different from hemoglobin A or hemoglobin S, and research have shown that this fetal hemoglobin, which is very it's present in about 65 to 75% within that range in neonates, like little babies, that fetal hemoglobin provides protection against the sickle cell disease. But then as the child grows older, the levels of fetal hemoglobin diminishes to below 10% or even less. Then the person starts exhibiting some symptoms or signs of sickle cell disease.
So Jama, assalamu alaikum. Sannun ku da yau kuma mun damu muku da shirin HealthZone kan Baina TV da wancan ga Dr. Yakub Yusuf muke da shi nan ga Medical Director ne from Kojak Medical Center daga Accra. Ya zo ya yi fira da mu kan sickle cell disease. Na tambaye shi a farko wani abu ake ce ma sickle cell disease. Ya muna bayanin malfunctioning of the red blood cells. And okay, basically, yende fara kina. My function of red blood cells. At the when the masala need a huge chicken. Jenny, yana jin house as I'm having curfew. Yeah, they're for the sound.
Sanabi Nunaka and
It's a it's a when the masala need is watching Jenny, we red blood cells and the shape normally come on donuts shape in yaki. There may be a pony ram is second and come in the donut yaki, but then masala ya up. She shape and cells and your saki. She is Yazama. I don't have my sickle. That's why the disease is called sickle cell.
Yeah.
So I say so you come on halfway, half of that whole donut.
When then sickle ma kwe wani abinda ake harvest shinkafa da shi.
Yes.
Masu yanka abengan wukanan yende yake abinda ake kiran shi sickle kenan.
Okay.
So she red blood cell na yazo yi kaman akanan sickle. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So she ya kanan na zuwa gaba shi ke kawo matsala da yanzu muka fara fira. Zuwa gaba mun ta tattaunawa kun gane shi na tambaye shi at what age in yayi ake gani irin wanga ciwon ga ko wanga masalan ga jikin shi yace wai yanzu ga technology ya advance isa ana iya gani as early as in yaro ma na cikin ciki but then in ga aka haife yaro so they were symptoms the signs bai show sai dai mai shi ya ja kai kuma wani around 6 months going ko ba ka ba yeah one time symptoms in ke show isa yanzu ga zamu ci gaba da fira mu ga abubuwan da zamu koya daga wurin doctor. So what signs and symptoms do such people exhibit, especially when there is a crisis?
Okay, as you mentioned, crisis is usually one of the things to look out when people have sickle cell disease. And this crisis, there's a syndrome, a collection of different things that can happen. Because the cells are sickle, they are abnormal. A lot of things are not right. A normal red blood cell can survive for about 4 months. That's 120 days. But the sickle cell, they have a very short lifespan. Yeah. They live for about 10 to 20 days and they are dead. Now, because they are not normal, they have a tendency to easily stick to each other. They're very sticky. Yeah. So they can clog blood vessels. On the way, 1 becomes 2, 2 becomes 3, and then they can become so much that blood flow to other parts of the body or beyond that part becomes difficult. This could cause swelling at joints. Mostly, this is one of the things with, I'm sure a picture will be shown as we talk, around the joints. There is fever. There is something called acute chest syndrome. Yeah. Usually when these red blood cells that are not normal pile up in the very small vessels in the lungs, you could have coughing, symptoms pretty similar to pneumonia. You could have coughing, you could have difficulty breathing, and these are some of the challenges you have for people who are having sickle cell disease. We also have instances of increased heartbeat. And you know, when the red blood cells are not normal, there's something in our body called phagocytes. They swallow, they eat up things that are not normal in our body. That's their main work. Yeah. So these phagocytes go about eating up these, protecting the body, eating up these red blood cells. And when they eat it, they release something we call cytokines. Okay. Cytokines get into our central nervous system, and the message that your brain sends to the body is to there's something called vessel constriction. Reduce the whole of your vessels. This causes your heart to start beating harder, and then you can feel like you get fatigued.
So not to cut you short.
Okay.
The red blood cells are supposed to be round.
Yes.
And then they end up being sickle.
Yes.
Sickle looking.
Yes.
So the phagocytes eat them up.
Yes.
Because they look irregular.
They are unusual. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So that's where the problem
That's
comes
where the
from.
problem is.
And in the normal circumstances, they are not supposed to eat.
Largely, when red blood cells, when they die, they call the spleen the burial point of a red blood cell. Yes, phagocytes are also involved in the process of, how do you call it, managing the dead red blood cell and getting rid of it. But these ones die very quickly. They die earlier than the red blood. So there's more breakdown by phagocytes.
So as they keep eating them, they cause other problems.
Yes, exactly. That also has this problem it causes for the person. So that is also one of the symptoms that people with how do you call it, sickle cell disease experience. And as I mentioned, tiredness, fatigue, malaise, all of these are some of the symptoms that people with sickle cell disease experience. Yeah.
Okay, can you quickly switch over just the summary?
Okay.
In
Hausa.
Yeah.
So Berin
for the benefit of
Berin try.
Nda
busanga chini da na iya so say amma Hausa dai na ya kadan dai. Okay. In ya zo masu tare da sickle cell disease nan yanda jini yake nan ba yanda ya kamata ba. So ya bari ababa da yawa yanda ya kamata ba aka nan ba. Barin yi barin gogo da kadan.
Yes, I want you to go through this.
Yeah. Iya zo game da shanin abin ga joints wuraren da sorry.
Joints da inda kasusuwan ke gamuwa.
Yeah, inda kasusuwan ke gamuwan nan. Iya zo wurin nan masu tare da sickle cell na yawancin complain kaman wuraren na kumbura. Iya yi kumbura aka nan shi ya zama abin ga zafi. Wannan abin da ke kawo wanne red blood cells nan sun kai wurin nan sun yi su, how do you say block in Hausa? Suna tattare hanyar wurin shi ya bar wurin yayi kumbura. So masu sickle cell disease na kan complain akan wannan problem da yawa. Akwai wani kuma cikin abin ga lungs mu hanyar jinin nan kanana like ba su da girma aka nan. Su yi su tare wurin, in sun tare wurin kuma ya bar mai shi ya fara tuwari mai shin nan bai yana fushi da kyau da waɗannan kaya. So wanga kuma na cikin matsalan masu ciwon abin ga sickle cell. Kuma akwai stroke because in waɗanga abin ga red blood cells da suke haddawa da junan nan sun kai cikin kwakwalwanmu suka block wani very narrow vessel. Part of the brain in that suka block on depending on wurin jikin da suke control nan ya kawo masalan stroke. So waɗanga duka na cikin ababen da masu tare da sickle cell za su yi su suffer.
In the
crisis in here.
Thanks so much. You've done well with the house. I think I'll reduce the burden the next time.
Exactly.
I will.
My house is not so good.
So apart from these symptoms, are there other symptoms that one can observe about an individual? Perhaps an individual who doesn't know his status.
Okay.
He hasn't tested for sickness. Perhaps maybe I live with the person. And are there things I can observe about the person that should ring a bell to be able perhaps to advise the person to do some checks on himself or herself?
Okay. For most people with sickle cell, it will be very difficult to miss, and all other things being equal. But then there could be some cases where people might not show symptoms as regularly as other people. Because when we say sickle cell, it's not 100% of the red blood cell are all sickled. No, it's just that a reasonable amount are those that are sickled. And it varies from people to people. In cases where it's not so apparent, intermittently, one of the regular complaints would be tiredness. Person might complain of tiredness very regularly. Aside that too, people might have difficulty with growth, especially if, how do you call it, a person is much younger. Because the red blood cells are not enough to take oxygen to part of the body that is needed during growth, it might result in people looking like they don't grow to their full sizes because the body did not get enough.
So there will be stunted
growth? Stunted growth, more or less. The people, they usually mostly look maybe slimmer than usual or wasted than usual. So these are some of the things you can observe from afar. Especially in communities where people don't regularly go to the hospital. And then you could recommend that, hey, please do check and go to the hospital. There's something I missed out in the beginning. There is a need for us to actually take issues of sickle cell very seriously in terms of checking. We have this habit of staying home and then probably going to a family friend who probably is a traditional practitioner, who some are reasonable, I've seen cases where people request for lab investigations before they even start anything,
But
but some don't.
Traditional treatment.
Yes.
Okay.
But then we have cases where people just associate it with spiritism or witch babies and all of that. And then they do all sorts of ritual to appease the gods, in quotes, and all of that. So people should take their health issues seriously and regulate going to the hospital in case of any instance. It's to avoid a whole lot when it comes to management of sickle cell.
Okay, thank you very much. So what is the line of treatment for this condition?
Okay, sickle cell largely is first managed symptomatically. When the person goes with pains in the joints or pains like the crisis, they give medications to help with the pain, mostly ibuprofen and some of these painkillers. Sometimes a lot of hydration is recommended because you need a lot of volumes of hydration. So that is recommended. Sometimes they do blood transfusion as a way of managing some of the complications. And then there are drugs like hydroxyurea, which is very, very one of the most common medications given for people who have sickle cell disease. And what hydroxyurea does is to help with increasing fetal hemoglobin. Because research has shown that the presence of a large amount of fetal hemoglobin reduces the gluing together of the sticky nature of the red blood cell, the sickled red blood cell. So hydroxyurea really helps in that regard. So people who have been on hydroxyurea for like some time would know that there's drastic difference between when they were on it and when they were on it largely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, for the Jama, if you are daddy. Munjega, that's a bit doctor, this question. That's a bit okay. The Zunga, ya got amuna signs, the symptoms, and the one in our kid, me share some crisis. Abu when the key happen, chicken me and also inside and the inside. So that's my talk. Yanzunga, Muna Gida, a chain, maybe Nananda one. Machine had a sickle cell, she be saniba. Beta by in testiba. When our Bujam we will observe chicken mutum, Muna tarry the nation chain. I think in the Moki Ganesha Beba, maybe one gamutum than other one out back. I ask me advice me she a J hospital, a J check, can she when she's some Koya, Bumke, one fear and Gaduka. She way a sickle cell and sometimes symptoms and exhibit back. One in I show one of my back again. Amma, I mean, she's a weather. I didn't know that she's a weather and away so dear. You don't want no more and she bass to some Gilman Jiki the kill. So perhaps I can make she at a certain age, but may she be look age and the person will look smaller and all that because there's something group it affects the growth. And you said sometimes there's
tiredness, yeah, lots of regular complaints for tiredness, yeah.
Regular complaints of tiredness, abubua. The Sunday kagairo one abubua jikin she. Become after the year when I get a hospital to check on our health and all that. So yeah, but baking magani kuma.
Yeah, baking magani largely in terms of unregulated, because akwai government how do you call it, incorporation of alternative medicines in government hospitals. What an excellent. These are tested in a lot of government hospitals and private hospitals that are accredited. What under Muke warn against this? What under Basuda any form of accreditation? The Suke Gida and then they are superstitious. Basu being any standard medical process to diagnose coughing abada magunguna. So these are the things we should be careful of.
Okay, so I understand when it comes to sickle cell, there's something called genotype.
Yeah.
Can you take us through it?
Okay.
Briefly.
Okay, with the genotype, I think this is actually where if people take very seriously, we might go a long way in solving the problem of sickle cell. Interestingly, nature did not mean it bad to give us that sickling in our blood. There is a correlation between sickle cell and malaria. It has been discovered that our body was trying to develop resistance to malaria, that's specifically Plasmodium falciparum. That's the most common malaria parasite in this part of our world. realized that people with sickle in carriers have more resistance to Plasmodium malaria infection. So this is an evolutionary advantage that our body was trying to evolve into. So you realize that medically speaking, people who are carriers, I would explain these terms very shortly. People who carry the, how do you call it, hemoglobin S modification have way better resistance to malaria than people who don't have it. Now, with the genotype, every individual has two contributions they make to their, every individual has two chromosomes, which they give one to their offspring. Let's say I get married to a woman and we form our first child. I give one of this chromosome to the child, and then the woman gives one to the child. So the child has two. The two I have was given to me by my mother and father, and it goes all the way back to the beginning. Now, in terms of the ratios, that's the genotype. My genotype as a man, how do you call it? I have AA or AS or SS. Now the AA genotype are the normal red blood cell forming genotype. Yeah. Now the S is the irregular genotype. Yeah. Now you need to have two S before you can show or exhibit sickle cell disease. Yeah. When you have one, no, it has to be both of them. Now in the case of sickle cell disease, the father must have given an S, and then the mother must have given an S for us to have a sickle cell disease. So all you have to do to prevent this was just to have known the moment you start dating. You look at these things. It doesn't cost much. There's a test called HB electrophoresis you do in hospitals. 100 cedis, more or less. And where I work is 100 cedis. It could be more, it could be less. Where you could just check it, and just before your relationship gets all emotional and complicated, you fixed it. Exactly. So you don't get, because I've seen people who have gotten to a point in their relationship where they feel they are meant for each other emotionally, they've sacrificed for each other, and now they go and then they realize that the man is a carrier, the woman is also a carrier. Carrier meaning the person has one normal HB coding genotype, which is the A, and then one abnormal HB coding, which is the S.
I actually wanted to ask that.
Okay.
Because if you are dealing with two people who both have the normal and the abnormal.
Yeah.
I know from my few checks that those people are carriers, right?
Yes, yes.
And then they are mostly okay.
Okay.
So if you find two people like that and they insist, they think they can make it, they think they want to get married, what advice would you give them? Because they think they have the high chances of having AA.
Yeah, they have a high chance of giving birth to AS.
Yes.
The AS is 50%.
Yes.
The SS is 25%, okay. And then the AA is 25%. So yes, every birth carries a new probability. Yeah. So you don't go like, okay, my firstborn was SS, so the secondborn would automatically be AS or AA. So every birth has a 1 in 4 chance of you giving birth to somebody who is sickle. If you are willing to take that risk, you can go ahead. Interestingly, you could actually have all children who are AS, AA. Okay. But you never know. You get it. You never know. That's exactly. So at the end of the day, we have a lot of people who are AS, and they are normal. Rarely does any AS start exhibiting sickle cell disease complications. It rarely happens. ASs are normal. They're just carriers. So when you have your partner who is also AS, that's where the problem is. If you are willing to take the risk, then you should take the risk. But you should know that for every childbirth, there's a 1 in 4 chance that your child would be carrying this, that would be SS, would be having the sickle cell disease. So this is the recommendation that would be given. Now there is some light at the end of a tunnel in modern medicine, which is a cure for sickle cell disease. This cure is still very complex because it's bone marrow transplant. Okay. And for anybody who
coming to that, I think
okay,
we'll get to that.
Okay,
so
when we get there,
can someone with sickle cell lead a normal life?
Yes. Yes, someone with sickle cell would have to, how do you call it, engage in a lot of precautionary activities just to stay clear from developing a crisis. Since we understand the pathophysiology of the disease, then we just have to make sure that we prevent ourselves from getting involved in some of these things so that we don't develop a crisis. Normal is very relative. Normal is relative. I don't have sickle cell disease, but then there are times I have headache, there are times I get very tired.
Yeah.
I also have some of these symptoms. Exactly. You are stressed to the core, and then you wake up the next morning and you're just so tired. You can't even, that is extreme tiredness. So normal is very relative. So the person could still have some of these little symptoms, but not as severe as life-threatening, like some of them have. So the person should stay away from engaging in strenuous activities like trying to do strenuous exercises or working for long hours or going to low oxygen concentration areas.
So that would go a long way to help.
A very, very long way to help. Take the necessary, have a doctor who, definitely there are hospitals where you could have a doctor who specializes in monitoring, doing checks, and then making sure that nothing is out of place. If there is something going out of place, they give you the necessary medications to rectify it. So you just have to be very preventive mostly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that's fine. Is the condition treatable?
We manage largely, and then as I said, in modern medicine, there is some light at the end of a tunnel, but then it's expensive, and it's also it's not 100% certain. As you know, stem cell research is not in its infancy, though they've gone beyond the infancy. But bone marrow transplant is when they replace the stem cells in your bone marrow with that of a donor. The donor mostly is usually a family member because you need to be, how do you call it, compatible. And then once they do the replacement, then the bone marrow start producing healthy, how do you call it, red blood cells. But then that is it. But then it's, as I said, it's expensive and it's not 100% certain that it's going to work. So that is the light at the end of the tunnel with a cure. It actually cures the condition, but largely we manage it.
Okay. So Jama, now doctor know in house and conduct. That's the way translation. That got me official. We are cookery anyway, but I just want to do this. Not ambitious. One line of treatment. Yeah, I also can treat sickle cell in hospitals. They cases in years, especially if there is crisis and all that. Straight away, they give painkillers. So it comes with a lot of pain, especially with the swellings and joints and the abubuana. So they give medications to take care of the pain. So now hydrate because they need to fill the person's fluid volume, and then in the gene machine you transfuse.
They do transfusion.
Yeah, it's an gene and all that. Akoi magumbuna the suke by I have had an example of hydroxyurea, but so we don't go so much into the medication. Yeah, but then that's the rough idea he's giving. And the suke treats such conditions, and they back and go from so let's buy okay. We are calling black genotype or genotypes when it comes to sickle cell. It's a when you fear get made a she okay. Yes, you work with Amuna. Your father the wake acquiring AS. AA is supposed to be normal. Yes. It's a AS and S and the cake in na. Yazama problem can because most of the time in couples muta need view zuka aure ko za su haifu guda mace na kawo guda namiji ya kawo guda isan namiji yazo ya kawo S the S and bai sawa ba wurin mace kuma S yazo an samu mai sickle cell SS she inde A kuma yazo S kuma yazo ya kara an samu AS na so dewa ba su ciwo ba da ya carry S yana cikin jinin su to daga nan ga ya advice kaman yasa ne mutane da su yi aure yake advice kaman iya mu check junan mu ba wai an ga me shi an ce oh na ga budurwa shi ina son aure ta ko na ga samari na son aure shi mu check wanga abubuwan ga don so dewa zuwa gaba yana kawo matsala da yaran da za haife isa shada ce mai o wadansu na nan sun sani wani na nan yana da AS ya sani macin kuma na da AS ta sani but me shi na feel kamar okay ko na da AS shi mai na da AS mu ya mu haife AA isa we can still do it but then ya ce wai it's a risk don baka ya gwada kuma ya ba da percentages percentage in AA na yana less than samun SS na.
SS is 25, AA is 25, and then the AS is 50%. Okay. 50, like if you are AS and AS.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it means you can't really tell what is going to happen. So it's a risk, and they can also go through that risk. When then that would be a decision for you to go back. You wouldn't advise anyone, would you?
Largely, I usually don't recommend. Yeah.
Yes. Since I said that to me, can someone with sickle cell lead a normal life? Come on, guest enough for last week. As you can see, she came. She told us she's doing fine. She's running her own businesses. She's doing just okay. But people have the perception out there. Come on, people like this can't really do much in life. You get it? They can lead a normal life if you have proper care.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you have proper care. Can as well hospital and do banker, you have your doctors, you have your treatment, you avoid certain things. He mentioned about exposure to certain things that can trigger a cause abubuanga. It's so duka shine ka duba kanka da kyau kuma ka samu mai duban ka. You have to have a regular doctor, a regular hospital and all that. And you will be fine. She not ambition. Can someone with sickle cell? No, is the condition treatable?
Treatable, yes.
With modern medicine.
Yeah.
Generally it is managed.
Yes.
We are bone marrow
transplant. Yeah.
So when then I took from a relative.
Yeah, usually a donor who is very close,
to
a match.
Person.
Yeah. And mostly it's usually a relative. Mostly. Yeah.
Yeah. So. It's able to.
Yeah, it cures the disease completely.
Yeah, so it cures it completely. It's a quick now hack and then the dark yeah.
Yeah, it has its associated risk, but then it's expensive as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Where I sad a risk kuma the ake cow but then yes, it is managed and it can be treated with bone marrow transplant.
Yeah.
Okay. What are your final words and recommendations?
Okay. My final
in general. Everything we've discussed about sickle cell.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One to those who have sickle cell, who are living with sickle cell.
Okay.
And then those who are seeking for lifetime partners.
Okay. Largely, I would say that sickle cell disease is here. A lot of people are living with it. It's pretty common in sub-Saharan Africa, as I said. And I explained why it's like that. Scientists have found an interesting link between sickle cell and malaria. We found out that because malaria has been endemic in Africa for a very long time, our body was trying to find ways to resist it. And in doing so, we had the hemoglobin S. So hemoglobin S is actually supposed to protect us from malaria. That's why people with AS have a larger resistance to malaria than people with the AA genotype. So if you find out, if you're watching today and you don't know your genotype, do check. It's not expensive. That is the cost of one pizza in some places. Just go to the hospital, go to the lab and then get it done, especially if you are planning to settle. And once you know your genotype, it helps you a lot of decision. So you don't enter and then regret later because you have to leave somebody who you've been dating for 3 years, 2 years, 1 year, depending on how long you've dated. Secondly, with people who are living with the sickle cell, condition, many of them must have seen a lot of doctors, I'm very sure, who would have told them about what to do and what not to do. Sometimes it's difficult. You want to do things your friends are doing, But then everybody have a unique or peculiar situation about their lives which limits them or otherwise to do certain things. So what I would recommend is stick to recommendations from your healthcare provider, and then try very much to, how do you call it, make the best out of this life. Because trust me, aside sickle cell, there are a whole lot of things other people are dealing with. They just have to make the best out of it. So you take your medication if you're on any medication. If you notice anything irregular, just speak to your, if you're on personal level with your doctor, call your doctor, or visit the hospital as quick as possible. We can live, we can improve our quality of life even though we are living with the sickle cell disease. Yeah.
Oh, okay. If you just joined us, we've been discussing sickle cell disease with Dr. Yakub Yusuf, Medical Director, Kujak Medical Center. This is where we draw the curtain on our discussions.
Yeah.
Shout out to my producer, Ahmed Said, aka Dr. Vibe. Thank you so much, Dr. Yakub.
Thank you very much too.
For coming. We've really learned so much.
You're
and we
welcome.
hope to have you here soon enough. Thanks so much. Thanks so much to all our viewers for joining us. We're on at the same time next week, 4 p.m. Health Zone on Baina TV. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah.